today, India changed. Many lives were changed forever. And I think the country also changed course in a way that the full implications of which we are still understanding today. But first of all, really, the destruction of lives with the most incredible brutality is really where I think we need to begin in remembering Gujarat. This morning, I was in another memorial meeting organized by Anhad, and Nishrin, Ehsan Jafri's daughter, spoke. And as she spoke, our hearts broke all over again. She recalled as a 4-year-old child being carried by her father in 1969 in the dark when her house, her home and everything was destroyed in the first major post-independence riot in Ahmedabad. And she says she has clear memory of the dark, her father holding her, walking along this railway path, and her memories of going into a relief camp in Shah Alam and standing in line asking for food. And yet her father resolved that he would go back exactly where their house was, in the middle of a Hindu majority area, and rebuild his home at that place. Because he said, everything that I stand for will have no meaning if I am frightened into going and living in a Muslim majority ghetto. And so, as a hero of secularism, in a sense, he went back and he rebuilt his house even stronger. And he was sure that whatever would happen, his neighbors would not attack him in the way that they did. And many other memories of a daughter. One of them, in fact, her son, she's in the US, would come back every summer, and his memories of his grandfather, one of those striking memories was actually that the study in which his grandfather worked, the tapes, the tapes, the switches for switching on the fans were all taped over, because his grandfather was worried that if the fans whirled, the sparrows who had made their nests in his library might get hit. And this gentle, learned poet, lawyer, politician met an end, which his daughter was saying, when we came, the body could not be located. They were just ashes. And in the end, they had to just pick up a handful of ashes from somewhere and believe symbolically that that was the ashes of her father. And when Ashish Khaitan's secret recordings, which we know about, described where people bragged about how they had killed their father, hacking each of his limbs and setting him on fire, the pain of the family, and it happened this day 15 years ago. She and her mother and her brother have been fighting a battle for justice. Zakia Jafri, her mother, I think is one of the bravest people I met. If there's one person who's deserving of the Bharat Ratna in this country, I would say it would be Zakia Jafri, who is and she repeatedly says she's not fighting for her family or for her husband. She's fighting in order that this should not recur. And the number one accused in her petition is Mr. Narendra Modi. He's the first accused. In 15 years, much has changed in our country. The person who many of us hold responsible for presiding over the carnage is today India's Prime Minister. And we see a climate in which hatred, discrimination are becoming more and more normalized. We hit one lower threshold and then that becomes normal. And we hit another lower threshold and that becomes normal. And there are many questions about about our solidarities and our resistance. So we are gathered here because it is important for us to remember what happened 15 years ago and changed our country. I hope not forever. It is important that we remember it. People say we should move on and forget. I believe, and forgive, perhaps. I believe that we have the right, the rest of us have the right to move on, to forgive and to forget when the survivors of that violence are able to move on, forgive and forget. And I believe that, I worked among the survivors in Gujarat, but elsewhere as well, and I found that there are 4 things that are necessary for you to be able to move on one day after hate violence of this kind. The first of them is an acknowledgement that this happened. A second is remorse. A third is reparation, that we all join hands and help them rebuild their lives. And a fourth is justice. And Gujarat is an extreme case where not only have these 4 not been accomplished, but we have accomplished the very opposite. So instead of acknowledgement, there is a denial. Nothing very big, no big deal happened. We have the infamous remark of Mr. George Fernandez saying, what's the big deal? Instead of remorse, Mr. Modi actually led, months after the carnage, a Gaurav Yatra, again unprecedented. Instead of reparation, we have the first instance actually in post-independence India where the state refused to do any rehabilitation and relief. And it is important to recall the remark that Mr. Modi made at that time, why aren't you setting up relief camps? And he said, I don't want to set up baby-producing factories. And I think it is important to recall that a constitutional head of government makes a remark of this kind of hatred against a segment of his people. We hear the discourse of Mr. Trump today. We express some outrage, but please remember that this is something that we have heard over and over again in the last 15 years. And we have lost our sense of outrage in these years. It's important also to remember these 15 years for the battles for justice that people like Zakia Jafri, Bilkis Bano, and hundreds of survivors with whom my own colleagues have worked over these years. We need to remember because of their courage and their battle for justice. But I must say that we must also remember those who fell along the way. I would equally remember, people who we demonized, Zahira Sheikh, for instance. Please remember, she was a 17-year-old girl when her whole family was destroyed. And what you and I would have been able to do when thrown into a circumstance of that kind. Some people were able to fight, some people have not been able to fight, but they have all coped with violence and cruelty and hate of a kind that the rest of us would find it hard even to imagine. And we need to remember 2002 also for that. But I think that we need to remember 2002 most of all for its aftermath. The fact that the person under whose watch this happened is today India's Prime Minister, celebrated in national capitals around the world, a whole past erased. We need to remember also what has happened in Gujarati society. and we've called today's discussion second-class citizenship. And it is because, to me, even more frightening than the carnage is these 15 years, which has normalized for the Muslim minorities, the Christian minorities, and increasingly the Dalits, a living with second-class citizenship. Where second-class citizenship, where in many ways you have, people talk, they say there's no violence in Gujarat. There's no violence because, you don't see, we notice violence when blood flows on the streets or smoke rises to the skies, but we don't see the violence, which is a much greater violence of the acceptance of living with fear and with hate, and accepting it as a normalization of our lives. And for all of these reasons, we have gathered today. And some friends have asked, why have we invited a set of young people who have not worked in Gujarat? Why do we want to hear them today? And there are many reasons why we want to hear them today. We want to hear these young people because, I was joking that we have, I think that we have some things to be very grateful to the present political leadership of our country. And one of them is actually, paradoxically, it has created spaces when we are listening to the voices of idealistic young people. And I think if India and the world will change, it is because of our young people and their idealism and their dreams. And because they have been persecuted for these ideals and these dreams, we want to stand in solidarity with them. But we also have invited them because we are reflecting not so much on what happened in Gujarat, but what is happening in our country. And on the, there's one part of the Gujarat model that we are more familiar with, which is business friendly, or if you prefer, crony capitalist economics, and that is one part of the Gujarat model. But the other part of the Gujarat model, which is the construction of the normalizing of hate, the propagation of hatred and bigotry as a normal way of life, social relationships, and the living of minorities as second-class citizens. That part of the Gujarat model is what we want to discuss today. How much of this is happening in the rest of our country?